The study of parasitology is like a nervous parent's worst nightmare. You take innocent activities like camping and playing with kittens and find that there are so many ways it can go horribly wrong. Well, now we've got another thing to worry about, and that would be swimming in freshwater lakes. Yep, lakes. Inviting, beautiful, shark-free lakes. Because in them lurks Naegleria fowleri, which, isn't too bad. Except it can cause a little touch of meningoencephalitis, which has been known to sometimes, most times, be rapidly fatal. No big deal. So, as we start drawing out the scene, I have a question for you sketchy micro buffs. Do you remember what bacteria is classically associated with swimming in fresh water? Right, it's leptospirosis. Cool, so again, the parasite is Naegleria fowleri, and it's an amoeba. And Naegleria sounds a lot like Niagara. And conveniently, fowleri sounds like falls. And double conveniently, Niagara Falls happens to be a large body of fresh water. Sometimes these are just too easy. So in what better way to enjoy these massive, crushing falls than to climb into a barrel and try to go down them? And nothing quite captures the essence of the high mortality rate caused by Naegleria than a barrel ride down the falls. Here's Annie Edson Taylor, a school teacher and the first person to go down Niagara Falls in a barrel, at the sprightly young age of 63. And what's this have to do with Naegleria fowleri? Nothing. Anyway, if you look at the barrel riders going down the waterfall in the back, they're actually in these cribs, taking the stunt up a notch, I suppose, and they're cribs to represent cribiform plate, which is the entryway for Naegleria fowleri. The trophozoite can get up your nose and go through the cribiform plate and then enter the CNS, which is why it's no surprise that it causes meningoencephalitis, which is a long, fancy word for inflammation of the brain and meninges. So that means the patient will present with nuchal rigidity and fevers, consistent with meningitis, as well as having an altered mental status from encephalitis. So this barrel rider here on the ground didn't escape his stunt without injuries. He has a neck brace for meningitis and a red turban for encephalitis. When Naegleria is the culprit of these symptoms, the disease is termed primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Again, that's because Naegleria is an amoeba. So this guy has some pretty severe symptoms, but it looks like he'll survive. This guy to the right, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. Unfortunately for this guy, this will be his last barrel ride. He smashed his head on the rock, representing that the disease is rapidly fatal. Also, test makers may not specifically say the patient went freshwater swimming, but they might talk about someone who goes water skiing, backpacking, or spends some time in the hot springs. And these are all scenarios where someone could be expected to be in freshwater and hence exposed to Naegleria. So here in the middle, we'll add this happy-go-lucky windsurfing dude to remind you of its association with water sports. Okay, so the lesson so far, no water sports, no lakes, no jet skis. I guess just in general, a rule of thumb that I like to use is if it seems fun, your risk of dying from a brain-eating parasite skyrockets. But even some not-so-fun things can lead to Naegleria infection. Recently, there have been cases where nasal irrigation systems that you can buy over the counter have been identified as a source for some patients, as well as some contact lens solutions. And that's because the stagnant water that's in both of these products is the perfect environment for Naegleria to thrive. We'll give our infected individuals some water bottles to hammer home that Naegleria can contaminate water supplies. So I guess the real lesson is just don't do anything. Just sit in your room and watch Sketchy Micro. I'll tell you when it's safe to leave the house. Okay, so how do we make the diagnosis? It's rare, but luckily if someone comes into the ED with fever, neck stiffness, and headache, they've bought themselves a spinal tap. And if you look at the CSF under microscopy, you would see some amoebas swimming around. To represent lumbar puncture, we've got Annie in the front with a nice bottle of champagne, with a corkscrew that looks like a spinal needle. Now, for those of you in the know, when you do an LP as a nervous resident or medical student, you sometimes get a bit of blood in the CSF. If you have steady hands and perfect aim, you may get what's called a champagne tap, where there's no red blood cells in the fluid. And for that, your supervisor should buy you a bottle of champagne, which you would drink, once you're off duty, of course. Anyway, these together should remind you that you would diagnose Naegleria with an LP. So if an astute clinician makes the diagnosis of primary amoebic encephalitis, the treatment of choice is amphotericin. We'll put our amphotericin amphibians all over this survivor here. Naegleria causes primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, which is rapidly progressive and has a high fatality rate. But for those who are diagnosed, try to get them started on amphotericin as soon as possible. It's pretty straightforward, but don't go anywhere. Sit inside where it's safe and watch the next video. Actually, wait, if you're in your house with an AC on, you could potentially get exposed to Legionella, but don't turn your heater on because then you would get carbon monoxide poisoning. I think it's best if you just leave your house immediately.